Picture yourself on the couch in 1969, tuning into your favorite show, and the guy who's been playing the lead for 5 years suddenly looks completely different. Nobody mentions it, not his wife, not his mother-in-law, not even the nosy neighbor across the street. You're just supposed to go along with it, as if an entirely different human being didn't just walk through the front door. Welcome to the world of classic television, where networks would swap out actors the way you swap out batteries in a remote and just hope nobody looked too closely. Today, we're counting down the wildest, most brazen, and sometimes most heartbreaking times TV shows replaced their main characters and absolutely pretended everything was fine. If you grew up watching any of these shows, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe so we can keep taking these trips down memory lane together. Now, before we start the countdown, we need to talk about the trope itself, because it's so common that it actually earned a name. TV Tropes calls it the other Darrin, and yes, that name comes from the very first show we're going to cover. A new actor steps into a role that somebody else used to play, and the show just offers the audience zero explanation, no plastic surgery storyline, no evil twin, nothing. You're expected to accept that this is the same person now. What's funny is that this kind of thing never used to bother anyone. Different actors play the same role in theater all the time, and nobody bats an eye. Television changed that equation because reruns permanently linked a character's face to a specific actor, and once you'd seen the original 50 times, the replacement felt like a stranger crashing Thanksgiving dinner. With all that in mind, let's count down 9 of the most memorable character swaps from 1969 to 2006. Number 10. Bewitched, the one that named the trope. This is where it all started, and not just for our list. Every time a TV show quietly swaps one actor for another and pretends nothing happened, the industry calls it pulling a Darrin, and that nickname traces directly back to this show. Dick York originated the role of Darrin Stevens, the lovably flustered mortal husband to Elizabeth Montgomery's Samantha, when Bewitched debuted in 1964. Behind the scenes, though, York had been battling a degenerative spinal condition caused by a severe back injury he'd suffered on the set of a film called They Came to Cordura. Years of chronic pain led to a dependency on codeine, muscle relaxants, and sleeping pills, and by season 5, the situation had become unmanageable. York collapsed on set in 1969 and was hospitalized, and when director William Asher asked if he wanted to quit, York simply told him that would be all right. What the producers did next set the template for every quiet recast that followed. Rather than address the change, they strategically aired 7 or 8 episodes in a row where Darrin didn't appear at all, hoping that by the time Dick Sargent showed up as the new Darrin in season 6, audiences would have forgotten what the old one looked like. Erin Murphy, who played the couple's daughter Tabitha, later recalled that they aired all those Darrin-free episodes thinking no one would notice, and obviously, everyone noticed. Here's the detail that makes this story even stranger. Sargent was actually the original choice for Darrin back in 1964, but he couldn't take the part because he was locked into a contract with another sitcom called Broadside. 5 years later, the role circled back to him almost by accident. Sargent played Darrin for seasons 6 through 8 until the show ended in 1972, and Bewitched wasn't even done recycling actors in the same role, because the nosy neighbor Gladys Kravitz and Darrin's colleague's wife Louise Tate were also both quietly recast during the show's run. The Darrin swap became so iconic that it graduated from a TV footnote into an actual piece of cultural vocabulary, and every single entry on the rest of this countdown owes its trope name to that moment in 1969 when a totally different guy walked through the Stevens front door and nobody on screen said a word about it. Number 9. Dynasty, where Stephen Carrington gets a new face. Literally. We're starting with this one because it might be the most creatively shameless solution on the entire list. Back in 1982, Dynasty needed to replace Al Corley as Stephen Carrington heading into season 3. And their fix bordered on genius. They wrote an oil rig explosion into the plot, put Stephen through reconstructive plastic surgery, and peeled away the bandages to reveal a completely different actor named Jack Coleman. Ridiculous as that sounds, you have to respect the audacity of it. Coleman stayed in the role for the rest of the series, while Corley didn't return until the 1991 reunion miniseries. Out of every approach on this list, Dynasty at least had the decency to acknowledge that something had changed, even if the explanation was completely absurd. Number 8. Charlie's Angels and the Revolving Door. Charlie's Angels didn't just replace one character. It treated its entire cast like a rotating lunch menu. Kate Jackson, Farrah Fawcett Majors, and Jaclyn Smith launched the show in 1976 and turned it into a phenomenon, finishing at number 5 in the Nielsen ratings that first season. And that's when Farrah walked away. Fawcett wanted to pursue film, and even after ABC tried to bump her weekly salary from $5,000 to $8,000, she still turned it down. ABC responded by suing her for breach of contract, and the settlement required 6 guest appearances over the next 2 seasons. What nobody expected, though, was how well the replacement would work. Producer Aaron Spelling cast Cheryl Ladd as Chris Monroe, Jill's younger sister, which meant Ladd arrived already feeling like part of the family. Season 2 actually finished at number 4, a full spot higher than the original lineup. The trouble came later, when Kate Jackson departed after Season 3 and Shelley Hack stepped in. Ratings dipped. Hack lasted 1 season before Tanya Roberts took her spot, and ABC canceled the show in 1981. Jaclyn Smith, for the record, remained the only Angel who stayed for all 5 seasons. Tension from those years lingered for decades, too. When the original 3 Angels reunited at the 2006 Emmy tribute to Aaron Spelling, Ladd wasn't invited. She later admitted she'd always felt like the outsider of the group, though she and Smith stayed close friends throughout. Number 7. Dallas and the Miss Ellie Situation. What makes this one stand out is that the replacement was temporary, dramatic, and ended in a lawsuit. Barbara Bel Geddes originated the role of Miss Ellie Ewing, the matriarch of the Ewing family, from the very first episode of Dallas. March of 1983 brought an emergency quadruple bypass surgery that kept her off the show for 11 episodes. And when the next season rolled around, producers brought in Donna Reed to take over the part entirely. No in-story explanation accompanied the change. Reed told UPI at the time that she would just show up without any gimmicks, and she ended up filming 24 episodes. None of that mattered, because once Bel Geddes recovered, CBS wanted her back. Lorimar obliged, which meant Donna Reed, an Oscar-winning actress, found herself abruptly fired. Reed sued for breach of contract and settled out of court for over $1 million. And she tragically passed away in January of 1986, not long after the whole ordeal. To this day, it remains one of the highest-profile cases of a TV recast being legally reversed and treated as if it never happened. Number 6. Valerie, then Valerie's family, then the Hogan family. Most shows stop at replacing a character. This show replaced the character, killed her off-screen, and then slowly scraped her name off the building. Valerie Harper starred as Valerie Hogan on this NBC sitcom, playing mother to a family that included a young Jason Bateman. 2 seasons in, Harper and her husband pushed for a raise plus a share of the syndication revenue, and that's where things fell apart. NBC programming chief Brandon Tartikoff essentially told her to take the existing deal or face replacement, and Harper refused. Summer of 1987 brought her firing, followed by an off-screen car accident that killed her character. Sandy Duncan joined as the boy's aunt, and the show was renamed Valerie's Family. Just to twist the knife a little further, producers eventually renamed it again to the Hogan family, stripping Valerie's name from the show entirely. Harper fought back in court and won. A Los Angeles jury unanimously ruled that Lorimar had wrongfully fired her and awarded $1.4 million plus 12.5% of the show's profits. That gave her the last laugh financially, but the message the industry absorbed from the whole saga was chilling, and we'll come back to that. Number 5. Dukes of Hazzard and the Coy and Vance disaster. If you want a textbook case of a network completely misreading its own audience, Season 5 of the Dukes of Hazzard delivers. Tom Wopat and John Schneider, who played Bo and Luke Duke, were the heart of a top 10 hit, and before Season 5, they both held out over merchandising royalties. The General Lee toy line alone was massive, and the actors wanted their cut. What the producers came up with was Byron Cherry and Christopher Mayer as Coy and Vance Duke, 2 previously unmentioned cousins who had supposedly left the farm back in 1976. Jai Waldron, the show's own creator, objected and warned that audiences would never accept direct character clones, but producers overruled him. And this is where it gets worse. Some scripts originally written for Beau and Luke had the names literally crossed out with Coy and Vance scrawled in by hand. Executive producer Paul Picard tried spinning it to the press, insisting these weren't replacements, but additions. Nobody bought it, and ratings collapsed immediately. Warner Brothers scrambled back to the negotiating table, and Wopat and Schneider returned with 4 episodes left in the season. As for Coy and Vance, they were dispatched before the first commercial break of the return episode, leaving Hazzard to tend to a sick relative, and were never mentioned again. 19 episodes of television erased like they never existed. 2 more seasons followed, but the show never recaptured its peak popularity. Number 4. Roseanne and the Two Beckys. This is the one that turned into a running joke, and eventually the show itself decided to get in on it. Leslie Goranson played Becky Connor for the first 5 seasons of Roseanne before leaving for college at Vassar, and 16-year-old Sarah Chalke stepped into the role for season 6 in 1993. Tom Arnold personally called Chalke to make sure she wouldn't also leave for school, and ABC paid her $10,000 to wait 4 months while producers finalized the decision. What happened next turned the whole thing sideways. During season 8, Goranson came back part-time whenever her school schedule allowed, while Chalke filled in the rest of the time, which meant 2 different Beckys alternating within the same season. Rather than pretend this wasn't happening, the show leaned into the absurdity by producing a self-aware credit sequence that parodied The Patty Duke Show, complete with William Shallard, who'd played Patty Duke's TV father, and lyrics that acknowledged the swap outright. Clever as that move was, it didn't erase the awkwardness for Chalke, who later recalled that fans would walk up to her and tell her they preferred the first Becky. She described the whole set as a pressure cooker. Keep in mind, Roseanne ranked as the number 2 show on television at the time of the swap, so all of this played out under an enormous spotlight. Number 3. Three's Company and the Suzanne Somers Pay Fight. This one goes way beyond a casting story, because depending on who you ask, it's a story about women's rights in Hollywood. Heading into season 5 of Three's Company in 1980, Suzanne Somers' manager and husband, Alan Hamill, requested that her per-episode salary jump from $30,000 to $150,000, matching co-star John Ritter and falling in line with what male leads like Alan Alda and Carol O'Connor earned on their shows. ABC refused. According to Hamill, the network's motivation went deeper than just the money. ABC had recently been forced to give raises to the stars of Laverne and Shirley, and Hamill claimed they wanted to make an example so that no other actress would ever ask for equal pay again. What followed felt almost theatrical in its cruelty. Rather than simply writing Somers out, ABC reduced her to a single phone call cameo per episode for the rest of season 5. Every week her character was supposedly sick or away, calling in for about 30 seconds, while the network auditioned her replacements in real time on set. Jenna Lee Harrison eventually took over, followed later by Priscilla Barnes. The fallout destroyed Somers' television career for years. She later admitted she couldn't land a job in television after being fired, couldn't even get an interview because the industry considered her trouble. Hamill went further, claiming that not one woman in television asked for a raise for 8 years after what happened to Somers. Not until Roseanne Barr finally broke the precedent. Whether that figure holds up exactly is hard to confirm, but the chilling effect on salary negotiations was real and widely discussed in the industry for a long time. Number 2. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and the 2 Aunt Vivs. On the surface, this looks like another standard recast. Janet Hubert played Vivian Banks for the first 3 seasons. Daphne Maxwell Reid took over in season 4, and the show barely acknowledged it. Jazz commented that something seemed different about Aunt Vivs since she had the baby. Will Smith raised his eyebrows at the camera, and that was it. What simmered underneath that surface, though, was one of the most bitter and personally painful feuds in sitcom history, and it played out publicly for almost 30 years. For decades, the mainstream version of events held that Hubert was difficult and got herself fired. Smith told an Atlanta radio station in 1993 that Hubert wanted the show to revolve around her, and Alfonso Ribeiro backed that up by saying she'd made things very difficult for the cast. Hubert pushed back hard, calling Smith young and caught up in a lie about things that never happened. 27 years passed before the full story came into focus. During the 2020 HBO Max reunion special, Hubert explained that she hadn't been fired in the traditional sense. NBC offered a contract covering just 10 weeks of work with an exclusivity clause that would have barred her from taking any other jobs, and her agent advised her to walk away. On top of all that, she was pregnant at the time and, as she revealed publicly, trapped in an abusive marriage. That reunion marked the first time Smith and Hubert had spoken in almost 3 decades. Smith acknowledged that he could see where he'd made the set difficult for her, and she told him she hadn't come to hold on to animosity. She'd come to resolve things because it was time. Beyond the personal drama, critics have spent years examining a cultural dimension to this swap. Hubert's Aunt Viv was an academic, a dancer, a politically engaged character who drove powerful scenes that fans still quote today. Reed's version of the character was written softer and more domestic. Whether that shift was intentional or coincidental, it has become part of the larger conversation about how Black women are portrayed on television. Years later, Hubert was announced as a guest star on Season 4 of Peacock's Bel-Air, the dramatic reimagining of the original series, while Reed had already appeared in Season 1 playing a different character entirely. Number 1. 8 Simple Rules and the Loss of John Ritter. Every other entry on this list involves contract disputes, salary fights, or backstage feuds. This one is different because this one is about grief. John Ritter starred as Paul Hennessy on ABC's 8 Simple Rules, which premiered in September of 2002. On the 11th of September 2003, while rehearsing for the second season, Ritter collapsed and was rushed to Providence St. Joseph Medical Center, the same hospital where he'd been born. Doctors initially misdiagnosed him with a heart attack, but what he actually had was an undiagnosed aortic dissection, and he died that night at 54 years old. 3 episodes of Season 2 had already been filmed, and the question of whether to continue the show tore the cast apart emotionally. Katie Sagal, who played Ritter's wife Kate, later described it in the most honest terms possible, saying everything was heartbreaking. She couldn't imagine doing the show without him, but she also couldn't imagine just stopping. They chose to continue, and they handled it with real care. A 2-part episode called Goodbye aired on the 4th of November 2003, drawing 20.5 million viewers. Paul's death was written as an aortic dissection, the same condition that killed Ritter in real life, and the first 4 episodes filmed after his passing were shot without a studio audience. James Garner joined the cast as Kate's father, and David Spade came in as her nephew, and castmate Amy Davidson captured the approach best when she noted that nobody tried to replace Ritter, that Garner simply grounded the cast and added warmth in a completely different way. The ratings told a harder story, though. Before Ritter's death, 8 Simple Rules sat in the low 40s in the Nielsen rankings. After, it slipped to around number 50. A move to Friday nights for Season 3 sent it plunging to 94, and ABC canceled the show in May of 2005. This wasn't a case of pretending everything was fine. This was a show trying to survive an impossible loss, and doing so with as much grace as a sitcom possibly could, which is exactly why it earns the top spot. Not for being the most outrageous swap, but for being the most human one. Conclusion. Looking at these 9 stories together, a few patterns jump out right away. Money drove most of these replacements. Somers, Wopat and Schneider, Harper, and David Caruso on NYPD Blue all walked or were pushed over salary fights, and in nearly every case, the person who left either regretted the decision or watched the show fall apart without them. There's also a pattern around honesty. Dynasty's plastic surgery, 8 Simple Rules Goodbye episode, even Roseanne's Patty Duke parody. These are the transitions audiences remember fondly because the shows respected viewers enough to acknowledge the change. The ones that just pretended a different human being had always been standing there tend to live on mostly as punchlines. Audiences notice, and they'd rather get a ridiculous explanation than be insulted with silence. And then there's the gender angle, which is hard to look past. Suzanne Somers asked for equal pay and was blacklisted. Valerie Harper asked for a fair share of profits and was fired. When the Duke boys held out for merchandising royalties, though, the network eventually caved and welcomed them back. That double standard wasn't subtle at all. But here's what all 9 of these stories really come down to. A TV show is only as strong as the people in it. You can change the set, swap the writers, move the time slot, but the moment you change the face that audiences have been inviting into their living rooms every week, you're gambling with something that can't be manufactured, and that's trust. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this trip through TV history, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one. Drop a comment and tell me which character replacement bothered you the most growing up, and I'll see you in the next video.